Before she became Princess Grace of Monaco, Grace Kelly had a secret relationship that could have destroyed everything. He was older, married, and completely wrong for the image Hollywood was building. When the affair threatened to become public, the studio intervened. And when she became a princess, the palace made sure no evidence would ever surface. This is the love story they erased from history. Chapter 1. The actress who wasn't supposed to have a PhD by 1954. Grace Kelly was Hollywood's perfect princess, elegant, refined, untouchable. MGM Studios had carefully crafted her image, sophisticated but accessible, beautiful but wholesome, the kind of woman men wanted to marry and women wanted to be. But Grace Kelly had a past. Before the princess image, before the careful publicity, before Hollywood decided who she was supposed to be, there was a real woman with real relationships, real desires, and real complications. Grace had arrived in Hollywood in 1950 at 21 years old. She came from Philadelphia's elite society. Her father was a wealthy construction magnate and Olympic gold medalist. She'd been raised with money, education, and expectations. But she wanted to be an actress, not just a socialite wife. She was beautiful in a way that photographs couldn't quite capture. Cool blonde hair, pale skin, and extraordinary eyes that shifted from blue to green, depending on the light. But it was her voice that directors noticed first. Low, measured, with perfect diction from years of theater training. MGM signed her in 1953, after she'd done a few films elsewhere. They saw potential but also saw a problem. Grace had opinions, relationships, and a private life that didn't match the image they wanted to sell. So they began the process of controlling everything: who she dated, where she went, what she said in interviews. What MGM didn't know was that Grace was already involved with someone who would terrify them if they found out. Chapter 2. The man she wasn't supposed to love. His name was Ray Milland. He was 25 years older than Grace, a successful actor with an Oscar, and most problematically, he was married with children. Their affair began on the set of Dial M for Murder in 1954, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Milland was 47, at the peak of his career and respectability. Grace was 24, still establishing herself. The power dynamic was obvious. But by all accounts, Grace fell deeply in love, not with his status or fame, but with the man himself. Milland was intellectual, cultured, and treated Grace as an equal in ways younger men didn't. He took her seriously as an actress. He discussed literature, art, and philosophy with her. He saw past the beauty to the intelligent woman underneath. The affair was conducted in secret hotel rooms, borrowed apartments, careful timing to avoid being seen together. Grace told only her closest friends. Milland told no one, knowing that exposure would destroy his marriage and damage both their careers. But keeping secrets in Hollywood was nearly impossible. Studios employed private investigators to monitor their contract players. Gossip columnists had networks of informants. And MGM had a vested interest in knowing everything about Grace Kelly's personal life. By late 1954, MGM executives knew about the affair, and they were horrified. Chapter 3. Why the studio had to intervene as Kelly was being positioned as Hollywood's new leading lady, the successor to Grace Garbo and Ingrid Bergman. But without their scandals, she was supposed to be above reproach. An affair with a married man 25 years her senior would destroy that image. MGM's head of publicity called Grace into his office. The conversation was blunt: end the relationship immediately or face suspension. Her contract had a morality clause. An affair with a married man violated it. They could destroy her career before it really began. Grace refused. She said she was in love, that Milland's marriage was already troubled, that his wife knew and was accepting the situation, that it was nobody's business but theirs. MGM responded with escalating pressure. They assigned a studio employee to monitor Grace's movements. They threatened to leak the affair to gossip columnists who destroy her reputation. They reminded her that they owned her contract, her image, and effectively her career, but Grace still refused to end it. So MGM took a different approach. They'd break up the relationship by making it impossible to maintain. They cast Grace in The Country Girl, opposite Bing Crosby, a production that would film for months in different locations. They scheduled her for endless publicity appearances. They made sure she and Milland were never on the same film set again. They physically separated them, making secret meetings nearly impossible. Chapter 4. The Letters. That were INTRCPD. Grace tried to maintain the relationship through letters. In 1954, before widespread phone use, letters were how separated lovers stayed connected. Grace wrote to Milland regularly passionate letters expressing her feelings, discussing their future, making plans, but MGM was intercepting the letters. Studio security had access to the studio mail room. Any correspondence between Grace and Milland was copied before being delivered. MGM executives read every word, tracking the relationship's progress and planning their next moves. The letters reveal a side of Grace Kelly the public never saw. She wasn't the cool, composed woman in her films. She was emotional, desperate, willing to risk everything for love. She wrote about leaving Hollywood if necessary, about moving to Europe, about waiting for Milland to leave his wife. Milland's letters were more cautious. He loved Grace but was trapped. His Catholic faith made divorce nearly impossible, and his career depended on maintaining his respectable image. He couldn't leave his wife without destroying everything he'd built. Grace interpreted his caution as cowardice. The letters became more desperate. She begged him to make a choice. She threatened to end it unless he committed. The relationship was falling apart under the strain of secrecy and separation. MGM watched and waited. They knew time was on their side. Chapter 5. When the press almost exposed Evie Year White and G.N. Early 1955. Gossip columnist Hedda Hopper received a tip about the Grace Kelly Ray Milland affair. Hopper had enormous power. A story from her could destroy careers overnight. She started investigating, calling sources, preparing to publish. MGM's publicity department went into crisis mode. They couldn't let the story break. Grace was about to win an Oscar for The Country Girl. She was becoming a major star. A scandal now would cost the studio millions. They made a deal with Hopper. Kill the story, and MGM would give her exclusive access to Grace for future interviews. Plus, they'd feed her other stories about MGM star scandals that Hopper could report that wouldn't damage the studio's major assets. Hopper agreed. The story was killed. But the close call terrified everyone involved. Grace understood that the studio would sacrifice her without hesitation if protecting her became inconvenient. And Milland realized that his marriage and career were at risk every day the affair continued. Relationship couldn't survive the pressure. By mid-1955, Grace and Milland had ended their affair. Not because they stopped loving each other, but because continuing was impossible. The studio had won by making secrecy unsustainable. Grace was devastated. Friends said she withdrew, became colder, more guarded. The warm, open woman disappeared. In her place was the cool blonde that would define her public image, but that coolness was armor, not personality. Chapter 6. The rebound that became a royal emerita. Age E9 1955. Grace attended the Cannes Film Festival. She was still recovering from the breakup with Milland, throwing herself into work and public appearances. At Cannes, she agreed to a photo opportunity with Prince Rainier, 3 of Monaco. It was supposed to be a brief meeting, 20 minutes of photos for publicity. But Rainier was charming, attentive, and most importantly, available. He was a 31-year-old bachelor ruling a tiny principality that desperately needed glamour and international attention. They began corresponding. Rainier visited Grace in America. MGM's publicity department loved it. Their star dating a real prince was perfect publicity. And for Grace, Rainier represented escape. A way out of Hollywood's control. A chance to start over without the studio monitoring everything. But there's evidence. Grace wasn't in love with Rainier the way she'd been with Milland. Letters to friends describe Rainier as pleasant and suitable, hardly passionate language. She was making a practical choice, not following her heart. The marriage happened quickly, announced in January 1956. Married in April, Grace was 26 years old, leaving Hollywood at the peak of her career to become Princess Grace of Monaco. The wedding was a media spectacle, watched by millions. What nobody knew was that the palace had investigated Grace's romantic history before approving the marriage. They'd discovered the Milland affair, and they'd extracted promises from MGM that the story would never become public. Chapter 7. The palace's secret agreement with MGM before the royal wedding. Monaco's lawyers met with MGM's legal department. They had demands. Any evidence of Grace's past relationships must be destroyed or secured. Studio files must be purged. Letters must be confiscated. Anyone who knew about compromising affairs must sign non-disclosure agreements. MGM agreed to everything. They wanted the fairy tale wedding. The publicity value was enormous. If that meant erasing Grace's romantic past, they'd do it. They'd been controlling her image for years. This was just the final phase. Files were destroyed. Letters were confiscated from studio mail rooms. Photographers who'd captured Grace with Milland were paid to surrender negatives. Columnists who knew about the affair were reminded of their deals with MGM. Ray Milland received a visit from studio lawyers. He was told that if he ever spoke about his relationship with Grace, his career would be destroyed. MGM would leak stories about his other affairs, his drinking, anything that would ruin his reputation. Milland signed an agreement never to discuss Grace Kelly publicly. The palace also had their own insurance. They hired private investigators to identify anyone who might have compromising information. Those people received visits, sometimes friendly offers of money for silence, sometimes threats of legal action if they spoke. Grace's past was being systematically erased, so Princess Grace could exist without complications. Chapter 8. The marriage where she couldn't afford Grace's marriage to Prince Rainier was troubled from the beginning. The palace was cold, formal, nothing like the warmth of Hollywood or her Philadelphia upbringing. Monaco's aristocracy resented the American actress who'd married their prince. Rainier was traditional, expecting his wife to focus on royal duties and producing heirs. Grace felt trapped in a different kind of cage. She'd escaped MGM's control, only to find herself controlled by palace protocol. And she couldn't stop thinking about Ray Milland, the relationship that had been real, passionate, and ultimately destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. Rehook 8. There's evidence Grace tried to contact Milland several times in the late 1950s, letters that were intercepted by palace security, phone calls that were monitored. She was still in love with him, or at least with the memory of what they'd had. Milland, for his part, remained faithful to their agreement. He never spoke publicly about Grace, but in private conversations with trusted friends, he admitted that losing her was the greatest regret of his life. His marriage continued, loveless but stable. He worked steadily but without the passion he'd once had for acting. Both of them had made practical choices that destroyed their chance at happiness. Grace became a princess. Milland maintained his respectability. But neither of them got what they'd wanted, each other. Chapter 9. The evidence that still exists despite the palace's efforts to erase Grace's past. Some evidence survived. Letters that friends had kept. Photographs that were overlooked. Hotel registries that documented their meetings. And most significantly, copies of the letters that MGM had intercepted. A former MGM employee kept copies of some of Grace's letters to Milland. In the 1980s, after both Grace and the employee had died, these letters surfaced. The family tried to suppress them, but a few excerpts were published in biographies. Hook 9. The letters are heartbreaking. Grace writes about feeling trapped, controlled, unable to live her own life. She describes Hollywood as a prison where she's expected to be perfect, but never happy. She begs Milland to help her escape, to make a life with her somewhere far from studios and gossip columnists. Milland's responses: the few that survived are equally painful. He loves her but sees no way to be together. His career depends on his image. His children would be destroyed by divorce. He's trapped too, just in a different way. The letters reveal that Grace's decision to marry Rainier wasn't about love, it was about escape. She was running from Hollywood, from MGM's control, from the heartbreak of losing Milland. She thought becoming a princess would give her freedom. Instead, it gave her a different prison. Chapter 10. The Legacy of a Hidden LOV. Grace Kelly died in 1982, at age 52 in a car accident that remains suspicious. Ray Milland died in 1986 at 79. Neither ever spoke publicly about their relationship. The secret remained intact, protected by legal agreements and social pressure. Today, most people remember Grace Kelly as Princess Grace of Monaco, the actress who had a fairy tale wedding and lived happily ever after. The real story is more complicated. She was a woman who fell in love with the wrong man at the wrong time, who had that love destroyed by studios and publicists, and who spent the rest of her life wondering what might have been. Hook 10. The palace succeeded in erasing most evidence of Grace's past relationships, but they couldn't erase Grace's memories. Friends who visited her in Monaco in later years said she seemed sad, distant, trapped. She'd talk wistfully about Hollywood, about her acting career, about the life she'd given up. She never mentioned Milland by name. But when she spoke about Hollywood, about what she'd lost, those who knew the full story understood who she was really talking about. The secret relationship the palace forced Grace Kelly to hide wasn't just about maintaining royal dignity. It was about control. MGM controlling their star, the palace controlling their princess. Powerful institutions deciding that Grace's feelings mattered less than their interests. She became an icon, a symbol of elegance and grace. But the woman behind the icon had loved deeply, lost tragically, and spent the rest of her life pretending that love had never existed. Final cliffhanger. In 2014, 32 years after Grace Kelly's death, Monaco's palace announced they were opening a museum dedicated to Princess Grace. During preparation, archivists discovered a locked box in the palace's private storage. A box that hadn't been opened since Grace's death. Inside were personal items Grace had kept hidden: photographs, letters, and a journal. The palace immediately classified everything as private royal property and restricted access. But one archivist who saw the contents before restrictions were imposed later spoke anonymously to a journalist. Hook final. According to the archivist, the box contained letters between Grace and Ray Milland that continued long after their affair supposedly ended. Not just from the 1950s, but from the 1960s and 1970s, Grace had been corresponding with Milland for decades. Throughout her entire marriage to Prince Rainier, the letters were hidden because palace security monitored Grace's mail. So she'd arranged a secret system writing to Milland through a trusted friend in America who forwarded the letters. Milland would respond the same way. For over 20 years, they maintained this clandestine correspondence. The journal was even more revealing. Grace had documented her feelings about her marriage, her regrets about Hollywood, and her ongoing love for Milland. The archivist described entries from the late 1970s, where Grace wrote about the life she wished she'd had staying in America, marrying Milland, acting in films instead of attending royal functions. One entry from 1981, a year before Grace died, was particularly heartbreaking. Grace wrote, "I made every practical choice I was supposed to make. I became a princess. I fulfilled my duties. I raised my children. But I never stopped loving him. Every day for 25 years, I've wondered what my life would have been if I'd been brave enough to choose love over duty. The palace has never confirmed the existence of these documents. The archivist who spoke about them died in 2019 without revealing their location. Monaco's royal family denies that any such materials exist in their archives, but historians who've studied Grace's life believe the story. It explains too many inconsistencies: Grace's documented depression, her difficult marriage, the sadness friends observed in her final years. She wasn't unhappy because she was spoiled or ungrateful. She was unhappy because she'd spent her entire adult life pretending. She didn't love the man she actually loved. If the documents exist, they're sealed by the palace, protected by privacy laws, hidden from public view. The fairy tale must be preserved. Princess Grace must remain the elegant icon who had a perfect life. The truth, that she was a woman who loved someone she couldn't have, who made practical choices that destroyed her happiness, who spent decades hiding her real feelings. That truth is too complicated for the fairy tale. Somewhere in Monaco's palace archives might be proof that Grace Kelly never stopped loving Ray Milland, that their relationship didn't end in 1955, but continued in secret until her death, that the princess everyone envied was trapped in a marriage to one man while loving another.